89.5 FM KPOO San Francisco and KPOO.com. And you're listening to Wake Up Everybody. And I'm Harrison Chess. Thanks for sitting in for Donald E. Lacey. And if you're in San Francisco in April 1961, to be exact, the weekend of April 21st and 22nd of 1961, you heard some of this fantastic music by Miles Davis recorded over that weekend at the Black Hawk, and that's on a CD entitled Friday and Saturday Nights at the Black Hawk, complete in San Francisco. Amazing, amazing piece of work by Miles Davis. And again, that's the type of music you could have heard if you were in San Francisco in the 1960s. And San Francisco has a amazing track record as far as music and history in San Francisco. So we want to spend a little time talking about the history of African Americans in San Francisco. Music is an important part of that history, and we have on the KPOO Live Line Jan Batiste Adkins, who is the author of a book entitled African Americans of San Francisco. It's the first of its kind pictorial historical account of the leaders of San Francisco's African American communities from the gold rush to the present. And she's going to be doing some appearances this month for Black History Month. And we like to welcome you to KPOO. Good evening. How are you doing?
Fine. How are you doing?
Just fine. You're going to be at Marcus Bookstore next Saturday, the 22nd. Is that correct?
Well, not at Marcus Books. I'll be at the San Francisco Public Library, yes, next Saturday.
And that's at 1550 Scott Street in San Francisco.
San Francisco.
And briefly, could you let our listeners know what this book is all about?
Okay, well, this book is about African Americans who established themselves in San Francisco from the gold rush days to present. So, of course, during the early days, many of the black slaves were brought to San Francisco by their owners, and they were brought to San Francisco, well, the San Francisco area. But they were brought to this area because the owners wanted them to pan for gold. And so many of them were able to either buy their freedom, and then they moved to San Francisco, along with many other free blacks who came from the East, or some of them were actually ran away and ended up in San Francisco, and were helped by the local people, by the local, both the black community and some of the abolitionists were able to help them to gain their freedom. So it begins with a discussion of some of these people, some of the early black slaves who were able to come to San Francisco, also some of the early black free people, such as Mary Ellen Pleasant, who came to San Francisco in the 1850s, and many others like herself who made San Francisco their home. And then the book continues with the discussion of African Americans after the Civil War and their contribution during that time. It also covers the African American military men who were stationed there at the Presidio. We have Buffalo Soldiers who actually were stationed in one of the bunks for this. They were segregated, as a matter of fact, and they were kept in their own private area, and then the housing area. And then we also had, then it continues on with a discussion of some of the Buffalo Soldiers, then continues on discussing some of those in business, employment, through the early 1900s, and then up to the World War II. I'm sorry, and so there's a discussion of the African Americans who contributed during that time. And after World War II, it begins. The book covers the Fillmore and some of the local people who came out of the Fillmore, who were the jazz greats. And then it also covers the 1960s, the redevelopment time period, and it continues in through the present time today. And, of course, it ends with our famous, Attorney General Kamala Harris. So it does include both the political, economic leaders, as well as those who were in civil rights, and those who were also sports as well as music.
And you mentioned the Fillmore District, and at 1 p.m. today, there's going to be a presentation at the San Mateo County History Museum at 2200 Broadway in Redwood City by Steve Okamoto, who will be discussing the forced removal of Japanese from the Pacific Coast during World War II. And could you talk about how that incident played a role in African Americans coming to the Fillmore District?
Well, it was very unfortunate. Many of at one time, that whole community was occupied by mainly Jewish people. And then the Jewish community moved into other areas, and the Japanese Americans then lived in the Fillmore area. Well, unfortunately, after the Japanese Americans were interned, then many people, the housing stock was available. And so many African Americans were able to move into the housing stock in the Fillmore and occupy those structures. Some were able to buy, some actually rented. It was a variety of housing, of the type of housing that was available for African Americans, ranged from both buying as well as renting. And then many of the people then, what happened is that African Americans were able then to establish businesses, restaurants, hotels, mom and pop stores, barber shops, beauty shops, things like that, as well as entertainment became the primary focus for that community. So that was the hub of the African American life in San Francisco in the Fillmore District.
And recently I was down on the waterfront, and they have recently put up banners about the history of the waterfront. And I saw a photograph of this African American who was a sea captain, and he was based down on the waterfront. And it was amazing, his background. Could you talk about the history of African Americans and the role they played in shipping and seagoing and developing the waterfront?
Well, first of all, before the African American community moved to the Fillmore, the African American community actually, the early community existed right down off the waterfront. Because remember, cities were built near the waterways. And so that was a very common area, and that's where many people lived. During the 1800s, approximately 1870, 1880s, there was a man by the name of Captain William Shorey. He was married to a very prominent young woman by the name of Julia. And Captain Shorey, actually, he was called the Black Ahab. And the Black Ahab, he actually was a whaler. He was the captain on a whaler ship, and many black men worked on this ship. And at that time, he was stationed his ship came into San Francisco, and he actually made San Francisco his home. And so he was one of several. And the other one, of course, the most famous person involved in shipping was who was William Leavesdorf. And William Leavesdorf actually came to San Francisco in the 1840s. So he was actually the very first known African American. There may have been many others who came as explorers, but he came, and he had a shipping business. And his ship was called the steam vessel, the Sitka, and it actually harbored right there in the waters off of San Francisco in the Bay Area. And so he was the very first person the very first black person who actually brought a ship and was involved in the shipping industry during that time. And then 40 years later, of course, we have then Captain William Shorey. And so basically many many African Americans who lived down off of the Fisherman's Wharf area basically worked doing hauling and doing things like that in the shipping industry, sort of like the longshoreman's job during those early years.
And every year in the summertime, we have the Bill Pickett Black Rodeo that comes to the Bay Area, and that celebrates the history and culture of black cowboys. And when people talk about black cowboys, I guess they associate cowboys more with, the Wild Wild West. Did cowboys have any role in San Francisco? Did some cowboys who couldn't cut it as cowboys, black cowboys, decide to come to San Francisco to pan for gold or work on the ships?
You know what? I'm not so sure that they were actually the black cowboys who did that. We know that there are many black men who came and women who came to San Francisco looking for, a new opportunity, looking for, new fortune, looking for a place to establish their homes. And they established their homes, their schools, and they came from all walks of life. And so what we do know is that over 400 actually came during those early years and established San Francisco as their home. And so whether they were actually cowboys or not, I don't really know. I don't think we have that information at this point.
And I believe this year is the anniversary of the Apollo Theater. I believe it's the 80th anniversary, and they're celebrating a milestone anniversary, and they're talking about how the Apollo now isn't what it used to be as far as being a place to showcase black music, but in its heyday, it was the place to go. Does San Francisco have any place like the Apollo Theater where not only up-and-coming performers would work, but mainstream artists would come and perform?
You know what? I'm going to make a plug for a famous book that is called It deals with the music in the Fillmore district, and I was not able to actually find a famous building, in fact, but there were several theaters in the Fillmore that were used for listening to jazz music, and there were lots of nightclubs, and so I think it was pretty spread out. But I think it was pretty spread out, pretty much. So in answer to your question, yes, there were several places, and they were primarily jazz businesses that were available for music, and there were big, large kind of pool hall of halls and things like that in theaters. But my book doesn't really focus on those at all.
Well, let me just ask another question about the music. Right now, Marcus Bookstore is doing a fund drive to stay in their building, and their building was the original Bop City. And as far as the music was concerned, did musicians play at places like the Black Hawk or like during the 50s and 60s, or was the music scene concentrated more on Fillmore at places like Bop City?
Well, it was concentrated primarily in the Fillmore, and the reason for that is because black entertainers could entertain in white establishments, but black people were not able to go to white establishments and to enjoy the music. And so what happened is that because of segregation, many of the black entertainers also entertained not only in the white establishments but also in the black establishments, so that the black community could also enjoy the music. And so that was the reason. So Bop City was a great place because many of the entertainers went to Bop City after hours, and they were able to practice their music and practice with one another. And what happened is many people came actually to the city and enjoyed the music. I mean, came to Bop City and enjoyed the music and listened to the music. So it became a place for not only other entertainers, but it also became a place for the public to go and hear, prize music that was not available in other places. So because of segregation, the benefit was that black people had great access to entertainment, right there in the community. And at the same time, we unfortunately were not able to enjoy music in the white establishments. So I so much support the protection and the survival of the bookstore, Marcus Bookstore, because that is the home of Bop City, and that is a landscape. It was a very important place back in its day, as well as the students.
Western part of the Bay Bridge was named after Willie Brown, and it was a big ceremony. And Willie Brown played a key role in fighting discrimination in San Francisco against African Americans. And can you talk about a time in San Francisco where African Americans like Willie Mays couldn't rent or buy a home in prominent neighborhoods in San Francisco, and Willie Brown's role in helping to end that?
Yeah, you know what? Willie Brown has deep roots in San Francisco, and you're absolutely correct. Willie Mays was not able to find a home, and he had to live with his coach because of segregation in San Francisco. During that time, it was a very segregated place. And people like Willie Brown, but particularly Willie Brown, was very instrumental and working with the community back in as early as the 60s in trying to deal with the fair housing issues. He was also very instrumental in working to protect the rights of homeowners as well as the renters, black African-American homeowners and renters living in the Fillmore during the redevelopment time. And Willie Brown was there to work with the community organizing organization that was there to protect the rights of the homeowners and those who rented. So his roots are very deep. Of course, he went to San Francisco State early on, and then to receive his undergraduate degree. Then instead of leaving San Francisco, he stayed in San Francisco, and he continued to serve San Francisco for many years. In addition to that, he was one of the lawyers that helped during the student rights time was at San Francisco State to defend some of the students, and he was very instrumental there to work at solving that whole conflict and problem. And so his roots are very deep with regards to San Francisco and civil rights.
And a couple of weeks ago, there was a column in the San Francisco Chronicle by columnist County Milner, and she was bemoaning the fact from her perspective that there was no black history or culture in San Francisco from her perspective, and that friends and relatives who might be considering a move to San Francisco, in her column she says, don't come here, go someplace else, because there's no history or culture in San Francisco. There's no black support system, so you might be better off in Oakland or Chicago or some other place with more African Americans. And they say history, the study of history, is important because you can see where you've been, you can find out where you're at right now, and you can plot a map of where you want to go. And with your book and other studies of African Americans in San Francisco, how would African Americans deal with the challenges of being pushed out of San Francisco because of the many elements that are negatively impacting San Francisco? And how will your book help African Americans deal with these challenges of staying in the city by the bay?
Well, I think we need to really feel very proud about our long history of African Americans in San Francisco. I mean, African Americans came before California was even a state, and San Francisco was the major hubbub because, of course, everything else was undeveloped throughout the state. So I think for us to walk away from our history, I think is really sad. We should not. I think we need to promote our history, and there are many different ways to do that. I think we need to promote the Fillmore as being the community that affected, that promoted, that developed and promoted local art and local musicians who soon became world-renowned musicians. And I think that we need to promote this and feel very proud of our history and the contribution that we have made to the city. In addition to that, San Francisco we've had black judges, black lawyers, we've had black professionals, doctors. I mean, there are so many areas that I was not able to cover in my book that of our own history that still needs to be discovered and chronicled and documented. And we really do. We have a rich history in San Francisco, so we really should feel very proud and should promote that. I think there's more. We have a lot of work to do. We do have the African American Historical Society, and there are other organizations, and I think we need to come together and we need to look at the history and really promote it. And yes, we are facing the numbers of population size of African Americans is beginning to dwindle in San Francisco, but that's been going on for the last 20, 30 years now. And I think we need to document our place and the importance that we've had and our contribution, and we need to encourage those, to continue seeking a home in San Francisco and trying to make San Francisco, the place that has always been a friendly city for African Americans as well as many people from other ethnic groups. I mean, the beauty of San Francisco is that there are people who live in the city. We all come from different both economic backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, and yes, it's very difficult economically because of the price of housing, but I still argue that it's very, very important to continue to encourage those of us who can live in San Francisco to live there and to continue to promote our history and to continue to participate, as we always have, in the development of the city and in the success of the city. And that's very, very important.
And we're speaking with Jan Batiste Adkins, and she is author of the book African Americans of San Francisco, and she will be discussing that book next Saturday, February 22nd, at the San Francisco Public Library Western Addition branch at 1550 Scott Street in San Francisco. And what will you be talking about during your presentation at the library?
Well, I'm going to talk about how to utilize this book, the importance of making this available to school-age children, and then the next steps, what other types of research that we could do as a community to promote, to develop, to document the African American experience in San Francisco. So I kind of want to take it a step further beyond what I've done and just try to give the community a chance to discuss what needs to happen next and where we need to go with our history and how to and then I'll also talk about how to go about documenting our history. It doesn't take one person like myself to actually do the work, but if everyone individually can begin documenting their family history, and then we need to establish a place to send that information, a collection point. I think that's so important. And the third most important point, I think, is that within every single family, it's so important to preserve the photographs. And that was one of the things I found in my research. It was so hard to find the photographs for the book. I mean, I really had to dig, and research every organization and individuals. But I found that many families do not feel that their family history is important. And, the photographs were, tossed or not preserved properly. And there is a place to send the photographs, and so that when we want to sit back and look at the history of San Francisco from different points of views, we will have access to the individual family histories in order to do that. And so I really want to talk about how to preserve your family history, the kind of resources that are available in San Francisco for that. I mean, the public library does collect and preserve family history. There are just many, many different resources, and I believe the African American Historical Society is another place that may or may not be available for this. But the city, I think the community needs to come together, and we need to talk about the importance of preserving our history.
And when you talk about documenting that history, we live in the technological center of the universe. Matter of fact, that's what the president of France just said the other day when he was here. And when people have all this stuff, they got videos, they got film, they got a ton of photos lying around the house, and maybe documents as well. People might say, I got all this stuff, but there's no way I can put this together in an organized fashion to help document this. Are there any real easy tools that people can use to start documenting all this stuff and putting it in a digital format?
Well, I believe that the Museum of African Diaspora does have, or has had in the past, services to help families talk about how to document family history. So I think the first thing to do is look at those people who actually do this. And so MOHAD is a good resource for this. And sit down with them and talk about how to, maybe they'll offer a class or something. I know that last year there was a class offered to the community for members who wanted to talk about how to digitalize their family photographs, and that's something that needs to happen. And it's so easy. We have cell phones now, so many of our photographs are on cell phones. We do need to organize our photographs and to organize in such a way that shows the history of our families. And we have to do that. Without the history, without documenting our history, then in years to come, it appears as though we did not exist. So we're still invisible. We're still invisible. And if we want to become, we want to document our contributions, we need to have the photographs, and we need to have the history.
And if our listeners want more information about you and your book, African Americans of San Francisco, where can they go?
To www.africanamericanhistories.com.
All right. Thank you very much, and good luck next Saturday.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. 89.5 FM, KPOO, San Francisco, and KPOO.com. Once again, we were speaking with Jan Batiste Adkins, and she is an educator, lecturer, and author of the book African Americans of San Francisco, and she is going to be speaking next Saturday, February 22nd, at the San Francisco Public Library, the Western Addition branch at 1550 Scott Street in San Francisco. So if you do have an opportunity, do go and check her out.